One of G.E. McAtnoff's favorite opening day shows was the Jingo Jukebox Jubilee. G.E. was a true American and felt that the USA should be honored in Fauxtopia. His team of Phobicators created an outdoor stage in the shape of a jukebox. The show was a singing and dancing review of the American songbook. G.E. hired the Sham Brothers to head the music department of Fauxtopia.
Hello there. I'm Forrest Sham.
I'm Chet Sham.
Yep. S-H-A-M.
M as in Mary. I am the lyricist of this team.
I tickle the ivories, as it were.
We were in-house composers for him. We were in-house composers from...
It was a good gig. It was a good gig.
We had our own office.
That's right. A little
bungalow. We had our own office.
A little bungalow with a piano in it.
And I loved working in the office. We loved working in the office. And he would call us and say, listen, here's the new ride. We need a song. We're doing an animated feature. We need a song.
Make it bigger.
The Jubilee had a cast of diverse Caucasians. There weren't just Germans and Irish, but Polish, Lithuanian, Scottish, and even Italians. The show proved to be a crowd favorite, so a new theater was built to allow for much more elaborate staging. Just in time for America's bicentennial, the new theater, dubbed the Jingo Jukebox, opened in March 1976. The new theater was state-of-the-art, with special lighting effects, projection screens, and indoor pyrotechnics. G.E. assigned veteran Phobicator Veronica Flute to be the art director. She was responsible for the original fascist military-inspired costumes for Propagander's propaganda circus.
I started working as a Phobicator. I had been interning with the Eames Company. I worked on the IBM Pavilion at the 1964 World's Fair. G.E. approached me and he hired me, and I designed all of the costumes for Fauxtopia. And it was after that I went on to design many more things for GE and the company.
This allowed for a much more ambitious version of the show. Now titled An American Jubilee, the show had new arrangements of the old American songbook standards.
Go. So he asked us to maybe put a little fresh spin on some of the old standards.
The Americana was very in there.
Very 1976.
Everything had that eagle
like
on it.
A Yankee Doodle. Well, we put a little
disco beat.
Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony, stuff like that. It was really fun. Right.
It was very great. I remember Isaac Hayes said to us, he said, that's good.
Yes, he did.
That's
he
good.
Loved it.
And I thought, well, that's, if Isaac Hayes loves it, that's validation right there.
That's right.
For the American Jubilee, Veronica made the visual choice to make the show a bit more burlesque to play on nostalgia, and a bit more disco to bring it up to date. With a new and expanded diverse cast that actually included what the Phobicators called exotic others, the show became a must-see during the summer of '76. However, as the 70s came to a close, the country's vision of itself was very low. Americans were enduring an energy crisis, the death of the king, civil unrest, and Iran had taken U.S. hostages. But this was all about to change, and a new Phobicator was about to recreate the Jingo Jukebox. In 1978, Los Angeles was awarded the 1984 Olympic Games. Because the USA boycotted the 1980 Moscow Games in protest of Russia invading Afghanistan, all the USSR countries rejected participation in the LA Games. This allowed the US to have the full athletic spotlight. Peter Uberoff, the president of the LA Olympic Committee, seized this opportunity to showcase American culture on the world stage and created the LA Arts and Culture Olympiad. Peter approached GE to bring the already established American Jubilee show to an outdoor stage as part of the Cultural Olympiad. But GE convinced Peter to invest in a much more elaborate, immersive dark ride that celebrated America. Dazzled by GE's pitch, the LAOC agreed to finance the development and construction of this new temporary ride. At the end of the Olympics, the ride would move to its permanent home in Fauxtopia's perceived reality section of the park. The Phobicators got right to work on developing the ride. GE again called on art director Veronica Flute to design the overall look and feel of the ride, and the Sham Brothers were tasked to write the signature song.
GE wanted us to create a celebration of what America could be proud of. More than just accomplishments or inventions. He wanted us to capture the American spirit.
GE wanted us to write another song, and because, well, everyone knows his favorite show is Cabaret.
Loved Cabaret.
Loves Cabaret.
You remember the year he took us? It was Christmas. He brought out the whole
I'll
Pantages,
never forget it.
and everyone all got to see Cabaret.
I was 4 seats away from John Kander, the composer. I couldn't believe it. I thought, I actually gave him my card. Never heard back.
Yeah, okay, but you know, G, favorite song. Tomorrow Belongs to Me.
I got it in my head. It's right here.
Optimism. He was a big artist.
So we took the song, and you can...
Optimism is what he kept saying. BF kept saying optimism.
That's right. And GE said, I want something like Tomorrow Belongs to Me. Come on. And I said, okay, well, and after we got through the cease and desist from Mr. Kander, but I changed a couple notes, and I think this is... I have the old sheets here, and I'm going to just show you what a little slower. Tomorrow belongs to the U.S. of A. Tomorrow belongs to the U.S. of A. Tomorrow belongs to the U.S. of A. We're the U.S.A.
Hello, sailor!
That's right.
But I remember when Reagan invaded Grenada, and I thought to myself, we're going to go into World War III, and we'll need a song.
Deborah Sussman of the LA design firm Sussman, Prasia and Associates established the visual graphic standards for the '84 games. Inspired by California flowers, Deborah developed a bright palette of fuchsias and turquoise and orange, and she used big, bold graphics and clean typography.
Well, I fully understood what Deborah was going for, and I knew that her designs could be translated into this Jingo jukebox ride.
Veronica used simple geometrics and variations of red, white, and blue to create a giant jukebox and speakers. Also hidden in the facade would be other celebrated symbols of American values, from justice to liberty to a small home with an American dream picket fence. And the new phobicator, Sam Gipper, was to write the narrative and script for the dark ride.
I'm Sam Gipper, the original rider for the Jingo Cruise.
Sam came in. He was very, very Reagan-esque and aggressive, assertive. He had a particular way of doing things, a particular tone, and it certainly felt as though, well, it was clear to me at the time the direction in which we were headed.
It became a question of what Americans believe in. Sure, if you ask most Americans at that time, I'd say religion or God. Some might say they believe in capitalism, trickle-down economics. But what really Americans believe in is that America's great and the rest of the world should envy us. So what GE wanted was more of a ride-through pep rally, touting our greatness.
Bombastic. It was aggressive. It was assertive. It was predatory. Words that I'd never in my entire career would have applied to any design aesthetic.
Still, Sam's designs and narrative worked. He developed the now familiar eagle boats and the flume track layout along with the show's story, while other fabricators contributed the visual gags for guests as they traveled along the various rivers and waterways of America. Originally, Sam asked Veronica to design 2 eagle hosts to greet the guests and be the guide through the dark ride. Positioned outside the entrance, the eagles, George and Martha, would tell guests what they would see inside, sort of like a carnival barker. The eagles were far into development when GE pointed out that Sam the Eagle was the mascot of the LA Games. And Busch Gardens already had an eagle mascot for their parks in Tampa, Florida and Williamsburg, Virginia. So the eagles were scrapped. Instead, Sam developed a new host, Rocket's Red Glare.
I wanted Rockets to be a big tough guy like Rambo, but I had to make him younger to appeal to a more family crowd, so he ended up looking like a skater kid in red, white, and blue.
I never really cared for rockets. Oh, but the fuse was amazingly clever in terms of show.
The ride itself was a great piece of American publicity. The story was a loose version of American history in expansion. The Rockets character was actually a perfect reflection of America in the 80s media, the puerile child sitcom star. But one of the best visual tricks Mr. Gipper and Mr. McAtnoff pulled was the fuse.
After the guests would leave the loading platform, they would be introduced to a Phobot Rockets. He'd sing the first verse of Tomorrow Belongs to the USA as he would turn to hold a lit match to a very long fuse. The fuse would sizzle and spark and travel just ahead of the boat. Guests would be hypnotized as the spark led them through the entire attraction from room to room.
The fuse is a spotlight. It would highlight that which the fabricators wanted you to see, but it also left a lot in the dark. For instance, the fuse lit up the Andrews sisters during the World War II section, but conveniently did not illuminate the Japanese internment camps that were also part of the interior landscape.
This all led to a very American 4th of July fireworks display at a picnic. But the fuse had a very, very long way to go.
Guests would follow the fuse through a Stars and Stripes tunnel that led to Old Glory. The flag, as a curtain, would part and guests would be plunged into an overdose of Americana. They traveled through various rooms following different U.S. waterways, each celebrating American patriotism. The first room displayed the formation of the USA and the Founding Fathers. Floating down the Delaware, you could see Washington crossing the river. The Delaware fed into the Missouri as guests followed the fuse to Lewis and Clark as they went westward, through Yellowstone National Park, Arches National Park, the Badlands, and finally into the Colorado River at the bottom of Grand Canyon National Park.
The fabricators have been accused of playing a little fast and loose with geography and historical accuracy. The Lewis and Clark section shows the explorers traveling through various national parks, but our national park system wasn't established in 1803. Critics need to remember that this ride is a celebration of American propaganda. So, of course, this attraction should not be examined as history, but rather an indoctrination to the American spirit of travel, nature, and adventure.
From the Missouri, guests floated into the Mississippi, past antebellum plantations and cotton fields of the Old South. The spark of the fuse mingled with the fireflies of the Okefenokee Swamp. The fuse then leads guests from the Deep South and into the Chesapeake Bay and the Norfolk Naval Base, where the sparks of the fuse mix with the sparks coming from rosy riveting. The greatest generation are celebrated in the romance of World War II. The American victory overseas continued on into a celebration of sports, which was an important aspect of the attraction due to the fact that it was developed and on display at the Olympic Games. Past the cheerleaders, tailgate parties, and the 1980 Miracle on Ice in Lake Placid, guests cruised into the LA River, a concrete waterway that becomes the backdrop for American-themed superheroes. The boat then turns into a darkened tunnel and starts its climb upwards, as the fuse, which was now multiple fuses, winds its way around boxes of fireworks, until finally, at the top of the hill, the fireworks explode. Guests now plunge down into the Potomac River in a major 4th of July celebration in Washington, D.C., and all the fiber optic fireworks explode overhead in the night sky.
Girl, the finale room is filled with all the American iconography. The Statue of Liberty, giant hamburgers for the picnic, that notorious couple from American Gothic. It's truly over the top. It was like mainlining Americana right into your veins.
The guests then sailed under Uncle Sam's legs into the epilogue room, where a lone soldier stands at attention, saluting Old Glory, lit by one spotlight. Guests barely noticed how the Sham Brothers tune slowly mixed into a solemn version of the national anthem. Despite the tight timeline for construction, the ride actually opened a week early. National and international guests and athletes staying in the Olympic Village were invited to the inaugural rides. The Americans loved it. However, international guests disembarked a bit perplexed. They didn't seem to understand the message of the ride, that America is simply better than that.
The ride was intended to celebrate America, but it became less about the glory of America's accomplishments and more about how horrible the rest of the world was. International guests avoided the ride entirely.
But that didn't matter to the LA Olympic Committee or McAdnoff, because the ride became the attraction to visit at the Cultural Olympiad. At the end of the Games, the ride moved to Fauxtopia and found its home in the northwest corner of the park, right next to the Triumph of the Will Skyway. This was actually a clever way to pay homage to the ride originally being built for the Olympics. The new facade was expanded to include the plotline railroad tracks. Guests would pass under the tracks into the entrance of the ride. This was after they would pass by two bronze statues of Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson that were gifts to Fauxtopia by the Daughters of the Confederacy.
The Confederate statues were the first changes to the Jingo Cruise that visually just didn't connect to the playful geometry of Miss Flute's facade. But you couldn't get a more appropriate prop to add to the narrative of American propaganda.
The ride opened with great fanfare, and throughout the 80s and until the end of the century, little changed in the attraction.
In the late 90s, GE wanted to update the Jingo Cruise. He wanted a scene depicting Desert Storm with Scud missiles being dropped on Iraq. The idea first come to him when he saw Wolf Blitzer or CNN reporting that the Scud missiles looked like fireworks. That never happened. Instead, an all-American ice cream parlor was added to the exit of the attraction, dubbed Desert Storm. They did have the best rocky road, though. It was, felt like you were eating victory. I had a lot of good flavors, actually. Desert Storm. Stupidest name ever was, but good ice cream.
However, attendance and interest dwindled at the Jingo Cruise. Most guests considered it too corny and hokey. That was until late 2001. Americans now had a new sense of patriotism and a sense of vengeance.
Well, I developed an alternative storyline that relied on the actual messages of the Jingo Cruise. See, I wrote the United Statements of America, gave them words to build new scenes. The in-house declarations were based on 4 different types of statements. They became declarative. I am American. Question, what the hell are you? Command, go back to where you came from. And exclamation, USA. That's your favorite, isn't it? Yeah, that's a good boy.
Using these messages as a guide, Phobicators frantically added scenes that reflected the new flag-waving sentiment that swept the nation. They were quickly made, and not with the same attention to nuance and design that Veronica or even Sam had created.
The flag was being used for a new agenda. It was becoming a symbol of I'm right, you're wrong. America's true colors were starting to show.
GE finally started to understand my original vision of the ride. Bigger, bolder, less America and more America. And I finally got to redesign Rockets the way he was supposed to be.
Rockets was no longer an 80s kid. He was now much more built. He also replaced a soldier at the end of the ride. He was still saluting the flag, but no longer in military dress. Some guests saw him as a bully or a jerk, while others celebrated this new kind of American.
Honey, I'm sure there's a certain kind of guest that saw themselves in Rockets. Historically, however, it should be noted that guests actually started to stand up in the boat to salute along with him. Of course, a few guests fell into the water. Apparently, it led to the whole scene being cut, so after going through Uncle Sam's legs, the whole last room was dark.
Appreciation for the additions and changes amongst the guests were split. Some guests, who called themselves Jingo Foamers, guests that foam at the mouth at anything to do with the park, started photopic bounding, dressing like the characters from the attraction. Others protested that the attraction was no longer joyful, but rather mean. For the past 18 years, the Jingo Cruise has been on a short list for a total refresh. There are various posts on Reddit and Theme Park Blog Z discussing existing concept art, showing two different flume paths, one going right, one going left. However, no official word from Fib Fabricating ever confirmed it. During the COVID pandemic year of 2020, as most theme parks closed for the duration, Fauxtopia managed to remain open, and the Jingo Cruise became a hotspot for controversy. Foamers claimed the ride as theirs and tried to quell anyone not part of their Fauxtopia bounding crew. They even took to making false signs to confuse would-be riders. However, those guests who were not foamers brought flashlights with them on the cruise, and they would shine a light onto what the few didn't. For example, in the Mississippi scene, they shined a light on the indignities of slavery, and also on the indigenous people crossing the river in the Trail of Tears. Or in the background of the big finale, guests could now see immigrants at the border, children in cages, police brutality, and people of color dealing with systemic racism.
It's really an honor to be a part of such a really beautiful, 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 patriotic thing.
We know that even after we pass away,
That's right.
this song will live on, and when people think of America, they're going to think of Tomorrow Belongs to the USA.
The Jingo Jukebox Jubilee and the Jingo Cruise will always hold a place in the history of theme park rides and even propaganda, especially for its ability to change.
The ride didn't really change, but the people, they changed. The ride always had a sense of arrogance about it. It started as a celebration of patriotism, and then it became jingoism.
The Jingo Cruise is still operational. However, instead of closing down for a complete overhaul, a new generation of fabricators is slowly changing the content of the ride. Even though it is considered a Fauxtopia classic, and there will be detractors, the true spirit of the original Jingo Jukebox Jubilee lives on in one of the most popular attractions in Fauxtopia.
If you are in the Los Angeles area in the spring or summer of 2022, make plans to visit the Treasures of Fauxtopia exhibit, on display at the Don B. Huntley Gallery on the Cal Poly Pomona campus. This is one of the first fully curated shows of artifact, memorabilia, and souvenirs from the most believable place on earth. Details can be found here by snapping the QR code or follow the link in the video's description.